Hey everybody, it's Curse, and today I'm going to bless you with a Diablo 4 Barbarian leveling build guide. Keep in mind that there will be a day 1 patch that could shake up the balance of the game and the meta of the game significantly. So I'll try to focus a little bit more on higher level concepts that you have to keep in mind when you're making a build and when you're playing the game, so that you can adapt on the fly even if the patch changes certain parts of this build significantly. Alright, let's get started. Irashaimase! Your choice of basic skills is not really much of a choice, honestly. Lunging Strike is just too good. The mobility that it provides is too useful to pass up on. I would go for Lunging Strike every single time. The damage is decent. The Fury generation is decent as well, comparable to the other basic skills. And yeah, just mobility is king. Next, for core skills, I would go for the highest DPS one, and that is Rend. And this is just for the early game. I would not be playing Rend in this entire build guide. It's just for starting up. As soon as we hit around level 30, 35, we're going to be speccing out of Rend. But early on, the damage is significantly better than the other skills. Hoda, for example, is 50%, whereas Rend is 108. Double Swing is 72. It is cheaper, however, but still, the AoE is not amazing. So I would say Rend is a much better early game skill. Just 1 point in it, then I would go back and get Battle Lunging Strike, just for that extra damage coming from Lunging Strike. And then, even though we don't have a source of Vulnerable yet, I would get Enhanced Rend and Furious Rend for that extra Fury generation to be able to keep up with spamming Rend. Then, at this point, let's mention a few important things that you want to integrate into every single build that you make as a Barbarian. You definitely would need a source of Vulnerable, because that's a damage multiplier of 1.2 times. And that 1.2 times can scale up really easily, even early on in the game, through your itemization. Weapons can spawn with plus damage to vulnerable enemies, and that is an independent multiplier to your damage. It doesn't get additive with anything else. It just straight up multiplies, and vulnerable can be applied to every single enemy, including bosses. So it's just too useful to not have in every single build, really. It's even early game builds. So look for a source of vulnerable. Next, you want a source of berserking, because that also significantly boosts your damage, and it gives you movement speed. Movement speed is always useful whether you're early game or late game. So definitely make sure to have a source of berserking. It also enables a lot of conditional bonuses that are on berserking. And finally, you want a source of unstoppable, which will allow you to break out of crowd control. In Diablo 4, being stunned is something you can break out of with this unstoppable attribute. And so that's why we go for Rallying Cry here, to take care of that unstoppable element. It's just too good to not have. Every single build should have unstoppable in it somewhere, maybe even multiple sources of unstoppable. But yeah, we start off with Rallying Cry here. It also gives us movement speed and resource generation. So it's great for party play to boost up your mobility and your resource generation just a little bit more. And now we have 2 points left over. I will put them into Rend for extra DPS. And now that we've unlocked brawling skills, I would take care of one of the remaining things, which is either berserking or vulnerable. And because we're going Rend and we have a really easy way of extending vulnerable, I would actually prefer to find a vulnerable source through charge. It's also another mobility skill. It also gives us unstoppable. So it ticks those 2 boxes of vulnerable and unstoppable. And yeah, your party members are going to love you, because you're going to be extending that vulnerability as well as applying vulnerability. And I think this is the best way to go early on. As the build progresses, you'll see we make adjustments, but this is for early game. And next, I would also grab a source of berserking. Warcry is also great for team play. It provides a significant amount of damage. Now we're unlocking weapon mastery skills. And I think Death Blow is super good early game. The damage it provides is higher than any of your core skills. The only downside is the 15-second cooldown, which you can reset if you ensure that you kill an enemy with it. So make sure to grab it, double its damage against bosses to make it more likely that you reset its cooldown. And elites count as bosses as well. So you're going to be dishing out a lot of damage against every single elite pack. And for the third point, I think there's a little bit of personal preference there. If you want to be relying more on other skills dishing out damage like Rend, you probably want to go for generating more fury, because we do have berserking taken care of through our Warcry. But I actually prefer Warrior's Deathblow just to have a higher uptime on our berserking. And then I would pump all the way to 5 points in Deathblow. So now we've unlocked our ultimate skill. However, we're running 6 skills. So something's got to give. You could replace Warcry with either Wrath of the Berserker or Call of the Ancients here, because we do have a source of berserking. I would recommend going for Call of the Ancients and putting it in place of Warcry. For that 6-second duration, you can wipe out multiple packs of elites. And then next, I would get 3 points in Furious Impulse. And you'll notice we have 3 skills that we are iterating over. And so we generate quite a bit of fury. And around level 30 to 35, I would start respeccing the build away from Rend into a different core skill. I would go for Double Swing just to make sure we have permanent berserking. And so take out everything from Rend, and we're still level 31, but we're specced into Double Swing instead of Rend. And you might ask, why Double Swing? Well, because it's the cheapest and it makes for permanent berserking. The 25 fury cost, if you do the math, you get 9 here from Lunging Strike, and then 6 from weapon swapping to Lunging Strike, and then another 6 from weapon swapping to Double Swing. And so if you do an iteration of Strike, Swing, and then Death Blow potentially, you're gonna be not losing any fury at all. You can do the same with Hammer of the Ancients as well. You can just go Lunging Strike, Hoda, Death Blow. So iterate through those 3 skills. And Hoda has the advantage of giving you even more fury generation. So despite it having a fury cost of 35, it's actually very comparable to Double Swing's 25 because of that extra 30% fury generation. But super early on, I would just go for Double Swing, max it out. We have 1 more point before we unlock the key passive. And I would recommend spending it on Pressure Point because we no longer have the guaranteed vulnerable coming in from Rend. And now that we've unlocked the key passive, I'm going to walk you through my logic on what's best early game. Gushing Wounds is clearly no good. It's reliant on crit chance and crit damage, which you're not going to have very high early game. Unbridled Rage is probably the best key passive for every single late game build that Barbarian has. However, for early game, until you address the problem of fury generation, you're not going to be able to run this reliably. And it also does not impact our Death Blow skill, which is incredibly powerful early on. So I would choose between Unconstrained and Walking Arsenal. I think given that we're running 4 damaging skills, because Charge counts as a weapon arsenal skill as well, I would go for Walking Arsenal. It lasts 6 seconds, so as long as you're casting one of Lunging Strike, Double Swing, Death Blow, and Charge, and Death Blow and Charge should be on the same arsenal weapon, whereas Double Swing is going to be on dual wield, and so that leaves Lunging Strike on the 3rd arsenal weapon. And that is just because of the cooldowns that these 2 have. It's best to align them on the same arsenal weapon. And so that way you should have a reliable 50% bonus to all of your damage at all times, which applies to Death Blow as well, not just your core skills. And so now we're running a build that benefits from swapping around weapons. And that's why I want to mention some gear that can be incredibly powerful for the build. The first aspect I want to highlight is Tempering Blows. Swapping weapons 6 times gains X fortify. And so we're going to max out our 45 thanks to this, which gives us a little bit of damage reduction. And then you can add your gems that increase DR while fortified. So this is also really easy to acquire. It's in Act 1, the dungeon that can give you that aspect. It is right here at the bottom left part of Act 1, Tempering Blows. So I would recommend grabbing it around level 30 to 35 if you haven't gotten it already. And then I also recommend grabbing Earth Striker's aspect. Again, it revolves around swapping weapons, and it gives you a guaranteed overpower, which is incredible amounts of damage early on in the game. In late game, it's insignificant. But in the early game, it can be really good to be used, especially if you align it with Death Blow. If you make sure that your 10th hit, that your overpower hit lands with Death Blow, that's going to amplify his damage significantly, and now all of a sudden you have a much greater chance that your cooldown gets reset. So if you're not sure that Death Blow is going to land a killing blow and that its cooldown is going to get reset, just align it with your overpower, and that should do it. If you look on the map, that dungeon can be acquired down here at the very bottom in this area of the map. So make sure to grab it as soon as you have that chance, around level 30 to 35. And now we need to add more sources of vulnerable because charge is just not sufficient by itself. So I would put more points into pressure point. After those 2 points, we can respec a little bit again. Take out the points out of Warcry. And then next, I would try to transition this build into the mid game. And I'll show you how we can do that. We can first add more Fury generation through this node because we're running basically permanent berserking at this point of the game. So this is 18% multiplicatively of additional Fury generation. Then we can farm this aspect of Relentless Arm Master. 20% increased Fury generation while all damage bonuses from the Walking Arsenal key passives are active. That can be farmed from this dungeon at the north side of the map. As soon as you have the ability to do that, you can grab it. And so now you have an additional 20% multiplicative Fury generation. And then we want the most overpowered aspect in the game, Echoing Fury. 4 Fury per shot per second while they're active. And that aspect is available right here. See Rock Caverns on the west side of the map. 2 to 4 Fury per second while active. So you can grab that one as well. And now we have quite a bit better Fury generation. And we can actually do something really cool. We can spec out of our basic skill and spec into Hoda. Thanks to the additional Fury generation of Hoda, we should be able to keep up with just spamming these 3 skills. Double Swing, Hoda, and Death Blow. Obviously, we want to go for Furious Hammer of the Ancients. And I would even take away points from Double Swing and put them into Hoda because the damage output of Hoda is slightly better, especially with Furious Hammer. And so at this point, even though we have points in Lunging Strike, we're not using it. We're just casting 2 core skills and then Death Blow. And this is the point of the build where I would recommend you branch out depending on what kind of legendary items you've dropped. If you were incredibly lucky and got Aspect of Encroaching Wrath, after spending 100 Fury, your next weapon mastery skill deals triple damage basically in a 2-hander. Then I would recommend staying with Death Blow and just going with this weapon, going with this Walking Arsenal playstyle where you iterate through your core skills, quickly spending 100 Fury, and then popping Death Blow. Triple damage Death Blow is no joke. You'll see that if you get this weapon. Otherwise, you can consider just going for 2 core skills, Hammer of the Ancients and Double Swing, and dropping Death Blow altogether, as well as Walking Arsenal, and going for Unconstrained. And in that case, I would also substitute Call of the Ancients with Wrath of the Berserker. And then utilize that extra skill slot for guaranteed source of Berserking through Warcry. And also extra damage. Just 1-1-1 is fine. So that's another option for you. You can just go dual core skill. And I think that's a really fun playstyle. I hope Blizzard enables playstyles like that in the late game as well. It just seems like right now the meta is triple shout, one core skill with unbridled rage, and then a bunch of multipliers wherever you can grab them on your itemization. But let's say we got lucky and we got encroaching wrath, because that's, I think, a lot more fun. In that case, I would go for hamstring, and you just want to make sure you have a source of bleeding, which is pretty easy. One way to guarantee a source of bleeding is aspect of berserk ripping, which is just extra damage in the form of bleed, and it's something you can farm from a dungeon. And as soon as you have that, you've now enabled your slow here through hamstring. And why that's really important is slow is considered a crowd control effect. So every single item affix that says damage to crowd controlled enemies is now enabled by this. Just one value point. Just keep in mind that certain elites and bosses can be immune to crowd control or can become unstoppable, meaning that you cannot necessarily have 100% uptime of that. But once you have that, you can go into here to get 9% crit chance. Even before you max that, I would max or put at least a few points into exposed vulnerability. Because then we can drop charge, since we're already taking care of vulnerable through this node, as well as unstoppable through a rallying cry. And then instead of charge, we can go for war cry for additional source of berserking, as well as extra damage. And now we're getting close to level 50. We don't need to max double swing. It's more of a utility skill to grant us permanent berserking, but also a little bit of extra damage and a little bit of fury spend, because fury spend enables our death blow. And then you want to get move speed at some point. It's just too good to pass up on. And because we're running the double shout, booming voice is incredible. So those are a couple of no-brainers. And once you get your double fury spender build going, I would also recommend swapping away from Call of the Ancients and going into Wrath of the Berserker because of the Supreme Wrath node right here that gets enabled by Fury Spend. You can get extra sustain from Invigorating Fury, just so you don't run out of potions all the time. And then the highest value plays that you can make are extra crit chance from No Mercy, and a little bit of extra damage and damage reduction from closed enemies. Doesn't hurt. So this is a really solid setup that should be able to take you through the mid game and into the late game quite easily if you can get this one Encroaching Wrath item. Now, if you don't get that, you can try playing with Deathblow and see how you like it. Or you can take all of those points out and just dump them into Double Swing. And just run double core. And instead of walking arsenal, like I said, go unconstrained. So these are the highest value aspects for me. And this is how I would recommend you spec into early into mid game. So this is what I'm going to be going with. You notice that through the process of leveling this, as I was explaining it, there were quite a few situations where I was respecking. And that's something I want to highlight is you want to respec whenever you need to in the early game and mid game. As you find legendary aspects that fit a certain build and enable a certain skill significantly to deal significantly more damage, you want to be agile and just adapt into that build as much as possible. So don't necessarily assume that you must go with a certain setup. Keep an open mind, and especially so if there's a huge balance patch coming out on Thursday. I also have a late game Barb build planned out with all the paragons spec'd out as well, but I'll have to go through that at a different point in time. I'll include the links to this build, etc. in the description, as well as links to some of these other useful resources. The map, for example, is really solid. DonTheCrown's gem and glyph list here, spreadsheet, is really good. So I'll add that link in the description just so you can view them and learn from them as well. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll see you on June 1st. Gochiso sama deshita.